What if success and failure came down to not luck or any of the other things that we often ascribe to it, but the questions that we ask? One of the interesting things as I study humans and I study great leaders that have lived throughout time, there's a commonality that I see, and that commonality is they all asked great questions. That's one of the big things that separate. Yeah, sure, they lay vision and leaders have to do that. That's very important. Otherwise, people won't follow if there's no vision, right? But oftentimes we think that that's all they do is lay great vision and then tell people what to do, and it's actually not the case. It's actually not the case. As I've studied great leaders, I've seen that they've figured out how to ask the questions that make people around them see the world differently, consider differently, and then evolve. You see, so uh, very often as a leader with a vision, you may see the future, you may understand where you're going, but you also know and understand that you're the only one who sees it. You're the only one who understands it. And if people around don't buy in, you don't get there. And you don't get there by just telling them, this is where we're going and this is what you're going to do. You get there by them understanding and taking a sense of ownership and pride in it too and going with you. But how do you do that? How do you do that? And the commonality that I've seen is questions. So let's talk about questions today. Let's talk about questions. And I bring this up because it's one of the things that I'm going to use the word overlooked. Um, it was recently that I realized that almost every single week, at least 3 times every week, someone says to me, "Oh wow, that was a really great question that I've never thought of or thought of in that way before." And it's just something that I've overlooked for a long time. I've talked to my staff for a long time about asking questions. Matter of fact, we have a core value: curiosity is king, right? And it's all about asking questions and being curious. But sometimes, what questions should we ask, and how are we curious, and how do we figure out what to be curious about? And this is the quality that great leaders have, and I've come to learn, and I want to thank Harvard Business Review actually for an article that I read that kind of illuminated the process that great leaders go through, um, and the things that they do in asking questions. And so let's talk about that. There are five categories of questions that you should ask. So you're facing a situation, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. But you're facing a situation where you're a leader and people are coming to you and they're looking for an answer or they're looking for direction, and they need some sort of help, right? And if you know me and you've been around me, you know, I say I don't answer questions of my staff. Instead, I ask them questions. When they come to me with something, I don't answer their questions. I ask them questions, and they fall into one of, and sometimes multiple of, these five categories, depending on the situation and the circumstance and the person that I'm talking to and I'm dealing with. So let's go through the five categories. So the first one is investigative questions. These are the ones that we all know. What's known? What do we know? What do we know? Okay. That's easy. We all do that. We all do that. The next category, sometimes we do as well, but maybe not as effectively. And that's the speculative, the what if. The what if. You see, the what if is great, not just for, oh, what if the world was a different place and some fanciful vision. The what if is great when an employee makes a mistake and you're looking at the process that they went through and you ask, well, what if you did this step this way? How would that change things? What if? What if questions are the speculative questions are absolutely, absolutely powerful. And most of us underuse those or use them incorrectly. Okay. The next one is the productive questions. We typically ask these. Now what? Okay. So that happened. Now what do we do? The what's known and the productive questions, we ask those all the time, right? Those are the ones that come to our mind if we're going to ask a question. Um, the next category is the introspective. The introspective questions. So what? In other words, what does this mean? What does this change? What are the values that this aligns with or misaligns with? So what? Why is this important? How does this change the world? And the world could be, something really tiny could be the world, or some could be the entire globe, the world. But how does this change things? How does this change things? How does this change things? So what questions? And the last one, the subjective questions. This is what's unsaid. What's unsaid? These are often the hardest questions because they're shrouded in assumption. We often don't ask the what's unsaid questions because we assume we know the answer. We assume we have an understanding, and so there's no need to ask that because there's so many other things that need to be asked. But those what's unsaid questions can be the absolute difference between success and failure. Absolute difference between success and failure. I remember, let me give you a quick example on this before we go. I remember years and years ago, back in the early 2000s, I bought a franchise. And I purchased this franchise, and it was the first of its kind in its area. And we had a territory, as franchisees do with a franchise or. And um, in the franchise agreement, it laid out that in based on the size of our territory, they believed two other franchises could exist within that space. And we had the right to purchase, or not purchase, but we had the right to build within that territory if we wanted. Okay. What it didn't say, and what was unsaid, and the question that we didn't ask when we purchased that franchise was, do we have first right of refusal? Like, if you decide to put that there two new locations do need to be within our territory, do we have first right of refusal? We didn't. We did not ask that question, and we didn't have it. We did not have first right of refusal. So, a couple years into owning this franchise and things going smashingly well, the franchisor sends us a letter. We're subdividing your territory. You now have a third, and we're giving it to two other new franchisees who are going to open locations that are bigger and badder than yours. And if you want to compete, you need to refresh your location and spend all of this money. Yeah, that was unexpected. And that was an unsaid. It was unsaid. And so we have to learn to ask those unsaid questions. Now, as I went through these, you probably saw yourself in some of these questions, like, oh, I ask that one all the time. And others, you're like, I ain't even never thought about that. Right? Or unsaid, what are you talking about? I don't know how to ask that. Yeah, I get that. And so one of the things I'm toying with right now, And thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. One of the things I'm toying with right now is, would it be helpful if we built a tool that actually helped you figure out the questions to ask in situations? Would that be helpful for you?